Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of chapter 4. The last part's going to deal with the Stamp Act crisis and moving into um, the Townshend programs, Boston Massacre, and then just the stirrings and the cooperation for the war. Okay. So first off, don't you think this kind of hurts? Looks like it hurts in this picture. We're hanging this guy up by his waist there. It seems like it would hurt a little bit. And he's either going to be lit on fire or he's getting ready to get tarred and feathered for the most part there. So in Stamp Act in 1765, this affected pretty much every American that was out there. Economic burdens were light, but the colonists were disturbed by the precedent set. Pass taxes to regulate the commerce, not to raise money. And these stamps obviously or attempt to tax without Assembly's approval. So, because they had no taxation, they had no representation. A few colonists did more than grumble. Patrick Henry finally stood up and gave what became known as the Virginia Resolve speech in the Virginia House of Burgess, and spoke against the British authority. He introduced the idea of declaring Americans possess the same rights as the English, and had the right to be taxed by their own representatives, not by someone sitting on a throne an ocean away from each other. Some opposition because of the wealth and power was disparity, but most was political and ideological. The Stamp Act repealed the boycott of the 1764 Sugar Act, which expanded to the other colonies and aided by the Sons of Liberty. And English merchants were begging to repeal because of the lost markets that they've had all throughout the colonies and sending their goods to other places, just like the Triangle Shirtwaist like the Triangle, the slave trade was the Triangle shipping trade between Africa and England and the West Indies. Sorry, I got stuck there for a second. Moving on. The Townshend program, and this was a negative reaction to appeasement in England, and the landlords feared that it would lead to increased taxes on them, and the king appointed William Penn as the new prime minister. The first problem was the Quartering Act. The British believed was reasonable since troops were protecting the colonists, but the colonists felt the exact opposite. They did not want to support these guys. And in 1767, they disbanded the New York Assembly until colonists obeyed the Mutiny Act, and the new tax, the Townshend duties on goods imported from England, especially with tea and with paper. And this started to lead to stronger enforcement of commercial regulations and stop smuggling through new Board of Customs Commissioners. And this was all based in Boston. And Boston merchants organized boycotts against products with Townshend duties. And New York and Philadelphia joined the non-importation agreement during the 1760s. After Charles Townshend died, Lord North repealed all the Townshend duties except for the tax that was on tea. And that led to obviously something that was very, very important in our history. Before there, it was the Boston Massacre. And this happened, when you think of a massacre, you think of a lot of people being killed or something bad happening. But this was only just 5 people were killed. And it happened on March 5th, 1770. The incident transformed by local resistance leaders into the Boston Massacre, and this engraving here was done by Paul Revere. Samuel Adams was a leading figure in the for public outrage for creating that, and then he viewed events in moral terms, and England was sinful and corrupt, and he organized a committee of correspondence in 1772, and other networks of dissent spread throughout the 1770s. And this was really the beginning of colonists really truly believing that they have a right to their own laws, their own opinion, their own beliefs, and not being told. And the next thing you'll see next chapter is common sense and and then the Declaration of Independence. So the philosophy behind this revolt. 3 years of calm, but in the 1760s aroused ideological challenge to England. Ideas that would support revolution stemmed from religion, from the Puritans, from politics, and it was somewhat opposed to Great Britain's government with the Scots and the Whigs. The new concept came that the government was necessary to protect individuals from evil of people, but the government made up the people, then therefore safeguards need to be against the abuse of power. And we didn't want one person telling us what to do, even though we ended up doing that in the future. And the basic principle was the right of the people to be taxed by only with their consent. No taxation without representation became the battle cry for the most part. And then the issue with the Tea Act. In 1773, the East India Company had large stock of tea that they could not sell to England. And the Tea Act of 73, passed by Parliament, allowed the company to export tea to America without paying any navigational taxes paid by the colonial merchants. And the colonial merchants were not happy with that. But they were allowed to sell the tea for less than the colonists and monopolize the colonial tea trade. And this enraged the merchants of the colonies. Obviously, a boycott was going to come out of this and try to boycott as much tea drinkers as possible, but tea was the drink of choice in the colonies in 1760s and 1770s. When Bostonians refused to pay the destroyed property after the Bostonians dressed up as Indians went into the ships and dumped out the tea over into the Boston Harbor as the Boston Tea Party, George III and Lord North passed 4 coercion acts, the Intolerable Acts, as they were known to the Americans. And this closed the port of Boston. It reduced the self-government power, and royal officers could be tried in England or any other colony. And then the last thing was the quartering of the troops. And the coercive acts didn't isolate Massachusetts and really made it a martyr, and from there it sparked a whole new resistance. And the last part here was the passage of the authority from the royal government to the colonists began on the local level where history of autonomy was strong. The Committee of Correspondence in Massachusetts and Virginia made the first intercontinental committee which established a cooperation between the colonies. In the First Continental Congress met in September 1774 in Philadelphia. Most colonies were present except for Georgia, and they made 5 major decisions. 1 was to reject a plan for colonial union under British authority. 2, endorse the Statement of Grievances, called to repeal the oppressive legislation, which is basically the Declaration of Independence. Recommended that colonists make military preparations for defense of British attack against Boston. The non-importation, non-exportation, and non-consumption agreement to stop all trade with Britain formed a colonial association to enforce agreements, and not everybody was for the 4th one. Some of the merchants wanted to keep trade going because they had a business to support. And the last one was they agreed to meet in the spring, indicating making the Continental Congress a continuing organization. That they realized finally that Ben Franklin was right, and that they had to have a group come together to support the colonies, and they just couldn't all do it on their own. And the last part, Lexington and Concord. Farmers and townspeople of Massachusetts have been gathering arms and training as the Minutemen. In Boston, General Thomas Gage knew of preparations, and he received orders from England to arrest any rebel leaders, and Samuel Adams and John Hancock in the Lexington vicinity. Heard of the Minutemen stock was nearby in Concord. They decided to act in April of 1775. But William Dawes and Paul Revere, if you remember that famous ride from Boston to one of the impending British attack at Lexington town, and common shots were fired and Minutemen fell. And on the march back from the hidden farmers, they were harassed and the British Army. They were harassed by the British Army, I should say. Excuse me, I said that wrong. The British Army was being harassed by the Minutemen. And rebels circulated their account of the events and rallied thousands of colonists in the north and the south to the rebel cause. And this was just really the beginning of the Revolutionary War. So that's it. I will do a review with you Friday in class.